Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The flight that changed everything. The early morning sun filtered through the windows of O'Hare International Airport, painting golden streaks across the polished floors. It was a typically bustling day in Chicago. Travelers hurried through the terminals with luggage in tow, announcements blaring overhead, and the occasional child crying in the distance. Amidst this chaos, Michael Carter quietly made his way through the crowd. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, and a polished pair of Oxford shoes, Michael moved with an air of quiet confidence. At 38, he had worked hard to achieve success. From humble beginnings, he had climbed his way to becoming the CEO of one of the nation's fastest-growing tech companies. Though he never flaunted his wealth, anyone who observed him closely could see that he was a man of distinction, one who valued respect, humility, and hard work. This flight to San Francisco was one of many for him. A critical meeting awaited him at the headquarters of a major tech partner, and the pressure of the upcoming deal weighed on his mind. He had grown accustomed to such flights and no longer found excitement in the hustle of air travel. Still, as he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent and proceeded down the jet bridge, Michael felt the familiar pre-flight lull, the quiet before the storm. The Boeing 737 cabin buzzed with activity as passengers boarded. Overhead compartments opened and shut, attendants directed people to their seats, and muffled conversations floated through the narrow aisles. Michael made his way to his seat, 11A, a window seat near the middle of the plane. He settled in, placing his carry-on beneath the seat in front of him. Leaning back, he exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the stress of work. The hum of the plane's engines had always calmed him, and today was no exception. As passengers continued to file in, Michael's attention was drawn to one of the flight attendants working in the cabin. She was tall, with red hair tied in a sharp bun and a cool, distant demeanor. Her uniform, a light blue blouse and fitted navy skirt, was pristine, but something about her presence felt unsettling. Her name tag read Lisa Adams, and though her appearance was immaculate, her smile seemed forced, her politeness mechanical. Lisa moved through the cabin with brisk efficiency, her tone clipped and rehearsed as she greeted passengers. But her eyes told a different story, one of impatience, perhaps even annoyance. She seemed to carry a chip on her shoulder, and it wasn't long before Michael noticed the subtle differences in how she treated people. When an older white gentleman struggled to stow his bag overhead, Lisa was quick to offer assistance with a practiced smile. "Let me help you with that, sir," she chirped, voice sweet and professional. Moments later, when a young black mother with two small children attempted to adjust her stroller near the aisle, Lisa's demeanor shifted. "Ma'am, that needs to be checked at the gate," she said curtly, the patients from before nowhere to be found. Michael sighed to himself, shaking his head. He had seen this kind of behavior before. He had lived through it, subtle biases disguised as professionalism, kindness extended selectively. It was nothing new, yet it never failed to sting. Michael chose to focus on his work instead, pulling out his tablet to review the agenda for his upcoming meeting. Just as he settled in, Lisa passed by his row. "Would you like anything before takeoff?" she asked the man seated in the aisle seat, a younger businessman engrossed in his phone. The man shook his head without looking up, and Lisa moved on. Michael waited a moment, then leaned slightly into the aisle. "Excuse me," he said politely, "could I get a glass of water before we take off?" His voice was calm, respectful, the kind of tone he always used when addressing service staff. He had learned, over time, that politeness could sometimes disarm even the most hostile people. Lisa paused mid-step, turning to look at him. Her smile vanished. The stiffness in her shoulders became more pronounced. "Water?" Before takeoff, she repeated as if Michael had requested something absurd. "You'll have to wait until we're in the air." Michael blinked, taken aback by her tone. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to inconvenience you," he said. "I just wanted to ask in advance." Lisa's lips thinned into a line. "You'll get your water when we're ready to serve beverages," she snapped, then turned abruptly, walking away without another word. Michael sat back in his seat, surprised by the hostility in her response. He glanced around and noticed that a few passengers had witnessed the exchange. Most pretended not to see, their eyes darting back to their phones or in-flight magazines. Others looked at Michael with quiet sympathy, though none dared to speak up. He knew this feeling all too well. It was the sting of being singled out, of being made to feel like an inconvenience simply for existing. Over the years, Michael had faced his share of biases, both blatant and subtle. He had learned to rise above it, to hold his composure in moments like this, no matter how demeaning they felt. He turned his attention back to his tablet, resolving to let it go. Escalating the situation would only make him look like the aggressor, and that was the last thing he wanted. The plane taxied to the runway, and within moments, they were airborne. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as the flight climbed steadily to cruising altitude. Passengers settled into their routines, reading, napping, or watching movies on their devices. Michael adjusted his seat and stared out the window at the sea of clouds stretching endlessly below. The beauty of it all always amazed him, no matter how many times he had flown. Nearly 30 minutes into the flight, Lisa returned to his row, pushing the beverage cart. Her expression remained cool, though her gaze lingered on Michael a moment longer than necessary. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked the man beside him, her tone warmer than it had been earlier. The businessman requested coffee, and Lisa poured it quickly before turning her attention to Michael. "And for you?" she asked stiffly. Michael hesitated for half a beat before answering. "Just water, please." Lisa's jaw tightened, her movements sharper as she poured water into a plastic cup. Without looking at him, she set it down on his tray table with a force that caused a few drops to spill. "Here," she said curtly before moving on. Michael sighed inwardly, brushing the droplets aside with a napkin. It wasn't worth engaging. Yet, as the flight continued, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa's attitude toward him wasn't just impatience, it was personal. For the next hour, Michael stayed quiet, his attention drifting in and out of his work. But as fate would have it, things were about to escalate far beyond what he could have anticipated. It started with a minor commotion 2 rows ahead. A passenger accidentally bumped the beverage cart, spilling soda onto the aisle. Lisa, already visibly irritated, barked instructions for him to move out of the way so she could clean up. The passengers near the incident shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one dared say anything. When Lisa reached Michael's row again, her anger seemed barely contained. As she passed him, her voice dropped to a whisper, just loud enough for him to hear. "You people always find a way to be a problem." Michael froze. The words hit him like a slap. He turned slowly to look at her, his expression unreadable, but his heart pounded. For a split second, their eyes met, hers still burning with irritation, his steady and calm, though a storm raged beneath the surface. Michael opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Lisa did the unthinkable. With a sudden, impulsive movement, she leaned down and struck him, her open palm connecting with his cheek. The sharp crack of the slap echoed through the cabin, silencing everything. Passengers gasped audibly, heads whipping around to witness the shocking scene. Michael sat frozen, the sting of the slap barely registering as humiliation burned through him. He could feel every pair of eyes on him, watching, judging, waiting for his response. But instead of reacting with anger, Michael took a deep breath, steadying himself. He knew this moment was bigger than him. And though Lisa's actions had crossed an unforgivable line, what happened next would define the outcome of this story, and change both of their lives forever. Silence before the storm. The cabin remained frozen. The slap's echo lingered in the ears of every passenger, its sharpness more jarring than any sudden turbulence. Time seemed to stretch infinitely in the space between Lisa's hand connecting with Michael's cheek and the stunned silence that followed. Michael Carter sat motionless, his cheek tingling from the impact. But it wasn't the physical pain that unsettled him, it was the weight of humiliation, the sting of knowing that the color of his skin had once again painted him as less than. His mind raced with thoughts he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Why do I still have to endure this? When will it ever stop? He closed his eyes for a moment, drawing in a slow breath, forcing the calm he had mastered over years of resilience. As a CEO, he had faced boardrooms of doubters, competitors, and critics. But this moment? It was far more personal. Around him, whispers began to spread, passengers murmuring to each other, their voices barely above the sound of the aircraft's engines. In the row ahead, a woman clutched her purse and turned to her husband. "Did she really just hit him?" she whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. Her husband, stunned into silence, simply nodded. The businessman beside Michael sat rigid in his seat, his eyes flicking nervously between Michael and Lisa. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. Michael's breathing steadied, and he adjusted his tie, an unconscious act of regaining control. Slowly, deliberately, he stood up. The tension in the cabin grew palpable as every pair of eyes shifted to him. Lisa, standing a few rows away by the beverage cart, turned her head sharply when she saw him rise. Her expression, already tight with anger, shifted to something more uncertain. For a moment, Michael thought he caught a flicker of fear in her eyes. He stepped into the aisle, his voice calm but loud enough to carry. "I'd like to speak to the captain." Lisa's mouth tightened. "Sir, you need to sit back down. You're causing a scene." Michael met her gaze evenly, his composure unshakable. "No, Lisa," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're the one who caused a scene." Her cheeks flushed red, but before she could respond, another flight attendant appeared, a young man named David, who looked visibly concerned. "Sir, is everything okay here?" David's tone was cautious, and he glanced between Lisa and Michael, clearly aware something had gone horribly wrong. Michael turned to David, his voice calm. "I'd like to speak to the captain." "I'm not raising my voice, I'm not being disruptive, but I think it's important he knows what just happened." David nodded quickly, his eyes darting nervously toward Lisa. "Of course, sir. Please give me a moment." He turned and disappeared toward the front of the plane. Lisa stared daggers at Michael, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her growing unease. "You're making this into something bigger than it needs to be," she said, her voice sharper now, her confidence faltering. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" he replied softly. "You hit me. In front of everyone. Do you think this should be ignored?" Lisa opened her mouth to retort but stopped, swallowing hard. The whispers had grown louder now, passengers craning their necks to see what would happen next. A small child in the back asked innocently, "Mommy, why did the lady hit that man?" The mother shushed her quickly, avoiding Michael's gaze. The captain's arrival. Minutes later, the plane's captain, a tall, middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a calm authority about him, emerged from the cockpit. His expression was serious as he approached the scene. "I'm Captain Thompson," he said, his tone even but firm. "Sir, I understand there's been an incident?" Michael stood tall, his voice composed. "Yes, Captain. I asked this flight attendant," he gestured toward Lisa, "for a glass of water earlier. She responded with hostility, and when I tried to let it go, she made inappropriate comments. When I questioned her behavior, she struck me. Right here in front of everyone." The passengers nearby nodded, confirming Michael's account. One elderly man in the aisle seat spoke up. "I saw it happen. She hit him, plain as day." Lisa's face went pale, her posture stiff. "Captain, he was being rude and disruptive. I had to." "Lisa." The captain's voice cut through her protest like a blade. He turned his full attention to her, his eyes narrowing. "Is this true?" Lisa faltered, her confidence unraveling. For the first time, she seemed to realize the gravity of what she had done. "I didn't mean." Captain Thompson exhaled slowly, visibly disappointed. He looked back at Michael, his tone measured. "Sir, on behalf of this airline, I deeply apologize. This behavior is unacceptable." Michael gave a small nod, acknowledging the captain's words. "Thank you, Captain," he said evenly. "I appreciate you stepping in. I'd like to file a formal complaint once we land." The captain nodded. Absolutely. I'll have a report prepared. For now, I'd like to move you to another seat, away from this situation. Is that all right? Michael paused, considering. He glanced briefly at Lisa, whose hands were trembling at her sides. She refused to meet his eyes. Finally, he spoke. No, thank you. I'll stay where I am. His words were deliberate, a quiet statement of dignity and resolve. He would not be moved. He belonged where he was. Passengers began to respond. As Michael returned to his seat, the whispers around the cabin transformed. For the first time, passengers began speaking up, some quietly, others more boldly. That's awful. I can't believe she slapped him, said one man near the front. This is 2024. How does this still happen? A woman behind Michael muttered angrily. Another passenger, a young black woman seated across the aisle, leaned toward Michael and whispered, "Thank you for speaking up. Some of us are too afraid to." Michael gave her a small, reassuring nod. He understood. Too often, moments like this were swept under the rug, accepted as the unspoken reality of the world. But not this time. Meanwhile, Lisa stood frozen near the beverage cart, her mind spinning. The captain had instructed her to remain out of the main cabin for the rest of the flight, leaving David and another flight attendant to take over her duties. Passengers glared at her as they passed. Her face burned with humiliation, but deep down, she knew it was nothing compared to the shame Michael must have felt. Reflection in the sky. The rest of the flight proceeded in uneasy silence. Passengers avoided small talk, the events of earlier replaying in their minds. Michael, meanwhile, gazed out the window, his thoughts elsewhere. As he looked at the endless expanse of clouds below, he reflected on his journey. From a childhood of poverty and struggle to becoming one of the most respected entrepreneurs in his field, Michael had faced challenges at every step. He had worked twice as hard, fought twice as long, and smiled through adversity that would have broken others. Today had been a painful reminder of those struggles, but also a chance to stand tall. He thought of his mother, who had taught him to meet hate with grace. "The world may see you as less, Michael," she had said when he was a boy, "but you rise above it. Always." Her words echoed in his mind as he sat quietly, the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. Across the aisle, passengers stole glances at him, some with guilt, others with newfound respect. The young black woman who had spoken earlier leaned in again. "You handled that so well," she said softly. "I don't think I could have stayed so calm." Michael smiled faintly, his voice gentle. "Sometimes staying calm is the most powerful thing you can do." The landing. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Michael felt a mix of emotions. Relief that the ordeal was almost over, pride that he had handled it with grace, and determination that this moment wouldn't simply be forgotten. When the plane touched down, passengers began gathering their belongings, but something was different. As Michael stood to retrieve his bag, several passengers approached him. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," one man said, shaking his hand. "You're a bigger man than most," another woman added with a nod of respect. Michael accepted their words graciously, though he knew they couldn't undo what had happened. Still, their acknowledgement mattered. It was a start. At the front of the plane, Lisa stood near the door, her face ashen. She glanced at Michael as he passed, but quickly looked away, unable to hold his gaze. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen, her actions laid bare for all to judge. Michael paused briefly, looking at her. "It's not too late to change," he said quietly, then continued down the jet bridge, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. The ripples of a moment. The cool breeze of San Francisco greeted Michael as he stepped off the jet bridge and into the terminal. The long flight was over, but the tension from the cabin still lingered in his mind like a storm that refused to clear. He adjusted the strap of his leather bag and walked with measured steps through the bustling airport. Around him, the energy was typical, families reuniting, travelers rushing to connections, and airport staff directing traffic. Yet, for Michael, everything felt heavy, as though he carried the weight of something larger than himself. Michael wasn't the kind of man who let moments define him. Not anymore. Life had thrown far worse his way, a childhood of struggle, battles against systemic obstacles, and years of proving himself in boardrooms that were never meant for him. But something about what happened on that plane stirred a deeper reflection. It wasn't just Lisa's slap or her venomous words, it was the silence of the bystanders, the unease in the faces of those who looked away, and the sheer ordinariness of it all. He walked toward baggage claim, pausing briefly to check his phone. A notification flashed, a text from his assistant, Rebecca. "Rebecca, hope the flight went well, sir. I'll meet you at the car in 10 minutes. Everything's set for tomorrow's meeting." Michael sighed. "Always efficient, Rebecca." He typed a quick reply and slipped his phone back into his pocket. Lisa's reckoning. Meanwhile, back on the plane, Lisa Adams sat alone in the crew's galley, her heart still pounding. The plane had been cleared of passengers, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. The silence was unbearable. In her 10 years as a flight attendant, she had prided herself on her professionalism, even if it was just a mask she wore. Yet today, that mask had slipped. Lisa's hands shook as she replayed the events of the flight. What had possessed her to lose control like that? She had been rude before, sure, but a slap. Her own voice haunted her, "You people always find a way to be a problem." The words tasted bitter now, their ugliness gnawing at her. She had let her frustration fester for years, frustration with life, with herself, and with her inability to control the direction of her own journey. But none of that excused what she had done. And then there was Michael, calm, dignified, even in the face of her outburst. His words had echoed in her mind ever since he left the plane, "It's not too late to change." Tears stung Lisa's eyes as she thought of her younger sister, Emily. The small dove tattoo on Lisa's wrist felt like a brand now, a reminder of their shared bond and Emily's relentless fight for inclusion and fairness. Emily had always been the compassionate one, the dreamer who believed the world could change for the better. And here Lisa was, becoming the very thing her sister worked to combat. Pulling out her phone, Lisa stared at the screen for a long moment before opening her contacts. She scrolled to Emily's name and hesitated before pressing call. "Lisa?" Emily's voice was light and cheerful, as if she hadn't spoken to her sister in weeks, because she hadn't. Lisa swallowed hard. "Hey, Em. It's me." Her voice cracked. "Lisa? Are you okay? You sound off." Lisa rubbed at her temple, her throat tight. "Something happened today. On a flight. And I don't know how to explain it." There was a pause. "What happened?" Lisa took a shuddering breath. "I think I messed up. Badly." Michael's unexpected call. By the time Michael reached his hotel in downtown San Francisco, the city lights were shimmering in the twilight. His suite overlooked the Golden Gate Bridge, and for a moment, he allowed himself to appreciate the view, his mind clearing just a bit. Then his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, and Michael hesitated. He rarely took unknown calls. But some intuition, urged him to answer. Michael Carter speaking. The voice on the other end surprised him. "Mr. Carter? My name is Emily Johnson. I believe you met my sister today." "Lisa." Michael's breath caught briefly. Emily Johnson. He knew her well. As one of his senior diversity advocates, Emily had worked tirelessly at his company to build programs that promoted inclusivity and awareness. She was one of the brightest people on his team, full of compassion and unwavering determination. "I know who you are, Emily," Michael replied evenly. "What can I do for you?" There was a pause, and Michael could hear Emily's unsteady breathing. "I just got a call from Lisa. She told me everything that happened on the flight. I'm so sorry, Mr. Carter. I don't even know how to explain her behavior." Michael's jaw tightened. He wasn't angry at Emily, she wasn't responsible for her sister's actions, but the emotions from earlier lingered. "You don't need to apologize for her, Emily." "I know, but," Emily's voice trembled. I feel ashamed. I don't know what happened to Lisa, but she's my sister, and this is breaking my heart." Michael softened slightly. "Did she call you to apologize?" "Yes," Emily said. "But she doesn't know how to make it right. She's lost, Michael. She's been bitter and angry for years, and I think today she hit rock bottom." Michael leaned back in his chair, staring at the city skyline. Emily's words resonated with him. Lost. Bitter. Angry. How many people carried those burdens, unable to see beyond their own pain? How many people allowed that pain to poison others? "What do you want me to do, Emily?" Michael asked finally. "I don't know," Emily admitted. "But I think she needs to hear from you. Not because you owe her anything, you don't, but because you've already shown her more grace than she deserved. Maybe hearing from you will help her take the first step toward change." Michael rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Could he forgive her? Forgiveness wasn't about excusing the behavior, it was about freeing yourself from its power. Michael had learned that lesson long ago. "Give me her number," he said. A conversation of change. When Lisa's phone rang later that night, she almost didn't answer. Seeing an unknown number made her heart leap into her throat. But something told her to pick up. "Hello? Lisa Adams?" The voice on the other end was calm but unmistakable. It was Michael Carter. Lisa froze. "Yes, this is Lisa." There was silence for a moment before Michael spoke. "Emily told me you called her." Lisa swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes again. "I did." "I'm not calling to scold you," Michael said, his voice steady. "You already know what you did was wrong. I'm calling because you need to decide who you want to be moving forward." Lisa covered her face with her hand, her body trembling. I'm sorry," she choked out. "I don't know what came over me. I've been so angry at everything, at my job, at life, at myself. But none of that excuses what I did to you. You didn't deserve that." Michael listened quietly. He could hear the pain in her voice, but he also heard something else, regret. Real regret. "Lisa," he said finally, "anger will eat you alive if you let it. I know what it's like to carry anger, to feel like the world is stacked against you. But you can't let that darkness control you. You can't let it turn you into someone you're not proud of." Lisa sobbed quietly on the other end of the line, her defenses breaking down. "How do I fix this?" "You start by acknowledging your mistakes. And then you work every day to be better. Not for me, but for yourself, and for people like your sister who believe in you." Lisa was silent for a moment before whispering, "Thank you. I don't deserve this kindness." Michael's response was calm, yet firm. "No one's asking you to be perfect, Lisa. But it's never too late to change." As the call ended, Lisa sat in the dark of her apartment, the tears still streaming down her face. But this time, they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of hope, the first step toward a better version of herself. Bridges to redemption. Lisa sat in her dimly lit apartment long after the call ended. The air was thick with a silence that wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. Her phone sat on the coffee table, still glowing faintly, as though the conversation with Michael lingered in the room. She pulled her knees to her chest and rested her chin on them, staring blankly at the far wall. Her mind replayed Michael's words, "You can't let that darkness control you." Darkness. She'd never thought of her behavior as dark before. Sure, she'd been bitter, angry at the world for 1,000 little disappointments, but she had always excused it, convincing herself that she was just tired or stressed. Now, though, those excuses felt hollow. For the first time, she saw her reflection clearly, someone who had let life harden her, who had lashed out at others because she couldn't face her own brokenness. Lisa closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "What have I become?" Emily's intervention. 2 days after the incident, Lisa found herself sitting in a small coffee shop across from her sister, Emily. The meeting hadn't been easy to arrange. Lisa had hesitated to face her sister, ashamed of how far she had fallen. Emily sat calmly, stirring her tea, her dove tattoo peeking out just below her sleeve. She had the same gentle, understanding aura that Lisa had always envied. "You look exhausted," Emily said finally, breaking the silence. Lisa's shoulders sagged. "I haven't slept much," she admitted. "I can't stop thinking about what happened." Emily leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Lisa, I love you. You know that. But I need to understand what's going on. This isn't just about what you did to Michael, it's about why." Lisa stared into her coffee cup as if the swirling steam might offer answers. "I don't know, Em. I've been angry for so long, and I don't even know where it started. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's," her voice faltered. "Maybe it's me." Emily nodded slowly. "You've been carrying that anger around like a shield, Lisa. But it's not protecting you, it's poisoning you. And it's hurting people." Lisa's throat tightened. "I don't know how to fix this." Emily's gaze softened. "You fix it by facing it. You've got to do the hard work. You have to own what you've done, and you have to make it right, not just with Michael, but with yourself." "I don't know if he'll ever forgive me," Lisa whispered. "Forgiveness doesn't always happen overnight," Emily replied gently. "But that doesn't mean you don't try. If you want to change, you have to take the first step." Lisa looked up at her sister, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "What if I fail?" "Then you get back up and try again," Emily said softly. "Change isn't about being perfect, Lisa. It's about being better than you were yesterday." Michael's reflection. Back in San Francisco, Michael sat at his office desk, the city skyline sprawled out before him. The incident on the plane had followed him like a shadow, even as meetings, emails, and deadlines piled up. The news had spread within the company after he shared his experience in a boardroom discussion about workplace bias. His staff had listened with quiet intensity as he described what happened, not as a CEO, but as a man who still faced prejudice despite his success. Michael turned his chair to face the window. He thought about Lisa. He thought about her bitterness, her defensiveness, and the way she had broken down on the phone. He had seen people like her before, individuals so weighed down by their own frustrations that they couldn't see how they harmed others. But he also thought about Emily. Emily, who had dedicated her life to advocating for fairness and inclusion. Emily, who had the compassion to see the good in people, even when it was buried under years of hurt. Michael's own journey hadn't been easy. He remembered the bullies in high school who had mocked him for his skin color. He remembered the professors who had underestimated him in college, the investors who had dismissed him in the early days of his business. Yet here he stood, not because the world had been fair, but because he had chosen to rise above it. Now, Lisa had a choice to make, and so did he. The apology. On the fourth day after the flight, Michael received an unexpected email. It was short, humble, and from Lisa. Subject: "I'm sorry. Dear Mr. Carter. I don't expect you to read this, but I hope you do. My name is Lisa Adams, I'm the flight attendant who hurt you that day. I don't know how to put into words how ashamed I feel. I treated you with disrespect and anger, and there's no excuse for what I did. I've spent the last few days reflecting on myself, on why I let anger control me, and how my actions hurt others, including you. You didn't deserve any of it. I'm reaching out because I want to apologize. I know a simple sorry doesn't erase what I did, but I need you to know that I'm taking steps to change. I've started speaking with a counselor to work through the anger I've been holding on to, and I've also reached out to diversity and inclusion programs to better educate myself. Your words, 'It's not too late to change,' have stayed with me. I'm trying to live by them. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you, and I hope that, one day, I can earn your forgiveness. Sincerely, Lisa Adams." Michael read the email twice, his heart unexpectedly heavy. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he smiled faintly, a mix of sadness and hope. Change wasn't easy, but this? This was a start. A conversation of hope. 2 weeks later, Lisa sat nervously at a cafe table in Chicago, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Across from her sat Michael, looking calm and composed, his presence as commanding as ever. She hadn't expected him to respond to her email, let alone agree to meet. "I didn't think you'd come," Lisa said quietly, her eyes on the table. Michael folded his hands together, studying her carefully. "You didn't think I'd come, because most people don't," he said honestly. "But I believe in giving people the chance to change." Lisa swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. For everything. I don't even recognize the person I was that day." Michael nodded. "Acknowledging it is the first step, Lisa. Change isn't just about saying you're sorry, it's about living differently." Lisa looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I've started counseling. I've been volunteering with community groups to learn more about diversity and inclusion. I don't want to be that person anymore." Michael gave her a small, knowing smile. "Good. That's how it begins." Lisa hesitated before speaking again. "Do you think people like me can really change?" Michael leaned forward, his voice steady but kind. "I know they can. I've seen it. But change isn't about perfection. It's about progress, about choosing to be better every single day. You fell, Lisa. But what matters is that you're getting back up." Lisa blinked back tears, the weight of his words settling over her. For the first time in years, she felt lighter, like the burden she had carried for so long was finally starting to lift. Michael rose to leave, extending his hand toward her. Lisa stared at it for a moment before reaching out and shaking it firmly. "Thank you," she whispered. Michael smiled, his expression warm. "It's never too late to start over, Lisa. Just don't stop trying." As he walked away, Lisa sat alone at the table, a newfound sense of resolve settling over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. A new horizon. A month had passed since the flight that changed everything. The memory of that day still lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed it, the slap, the silence, and the quiet dignity with which Michael Carter handled the situation. For Michael, however, the incident had grown into something much larger than a moment of humiliation. It had sparked a conversation that extended far beyond the confines of that airplane cabin. Lisa's journey forward. Lisa Adams sat on a metal bench in a community center, waiting nervously for the day's workshop to begin. The room buzzed with activity, people of different ages, races, and backgrounds gathered to share stories and learn about diversity, inclusion, and healing. Today's session was part of a program designed to educate participants on unconscious bias, systemic racism, and empathy. When Lisa first walked through the center's doors, her shame nearly swallowed her whole. She had avoided eye contact with everyone, afraid they would see her for who she was, a woman who had let bitterness turn into cruelty. But over the last few weeks, something remarkable had happened. She had begun to listen, to truly listen, and to see the world differently. Lisa's counselor, an older black woman named Margaret, had been instrumental in guiding her. Margaret had a way of asking questions that peeled back layers Lisa didn't even know existed. "What are you angry about, Lisa?" Margaret had asked during their first session. Lisa had shrugged then, unwilling to confront the answer. But through tears and hard conversations, she realized the truth: she was angry at herself. Angry for not living up to the dreams she'd once had. Angry that life had slipped out of her control. And when that anger boiled over, she lashed out at those who reminded her of her failures, as though their success made her smaller by comparison. Today, as the workshop began, Lisa took a deep breath. She had agreed to share her story in front of the group, a decision that terrified her, but one she knew was necessary. The facilitator, a tall man with kind eyes, called her name. Lisa stood, clutching the small note card she had prepared. The room grew quiet as she stepped forward. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, her words grew stronger. "My name is Lisa Adams," she began, looking at the faces in the room. "A month ago, I did something terrible. I let my bitterness and anger hurt someone who didn't deserve it, someone who had shown me nothing but dignity in the face of my cruelty." She paused, the weight of her confession hanging in the air. "That person, Michael Carter, taught me a lesson I didn't know I needed. It's never too late to change. I'm here because I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to learn. I want to grow. And I want to help others understand how harmful our actions and biases can be, even when we don't realize it." Lisa looked up, her voice soft but clear. "I'm not perfect, and I never will be. But I'm trying. And I'll keep trying." When she finished, the room was silent. Then, one by one, people began to clap, not out of approval, but out of respect. Lisa's honesty had moved them, because in her story, many saw their own struggles reflected back. She sat down, her heart racing, but for the first time in years, she felt free. Michael's decision to inspire change. Across the country, Michael Carter sat in his office conference room, surrounded by members of his company's senior leadership team. On the large screen at the front of the room was the title of his latest initiative: The Horizon Project, Conversations for Change. This project, Michael began, addressing the room, is about turning moments of adversity into opportunities for progress. Too often, incidents like what happened on that flight go unaddressed or ignored. We need to change that, not with anger, but with action. The Horizon Project was Michael's brainchild, a nationwide program designed to partner with schools, corporations, and community centers to foster conversations about unconscious bias, respect, and inclusion. It was a bold initiative, but Michael knew it was necessary. Change didn't happen by accident, it happened through deliberate effort. Rebecca, his assistant, raised her hand. "What's your goal with this project, Michael?" Michael smiled faintly, his tone thoughtful. "The goal is to make people uncomfortable in the right way. We need to hold up a mirror to ourselves and ask, how can I be better? How can I make this world fairer and more compassionate? We're all part of the problem until we choose to be part of the solution." The room erupted in quiet applause. Michael knew that the Horizon Project was ambitious, but he also knew that small steps led to big changes. The conversation had to start somewhere. A chance meeting. 2 months after the flight, Michael was invited to speak at a community leadership summit in Chicago, a city he always held close to his heart. The event was bustling with local leaders, educators, and advocates. People greeted Michael warmly as he entered the venue, their respect for him evident. After delivering his keynote speech about leadership, forgiveness, and change, Michael lingered to speak with attendees. As he made his way through the crowd, a familiar voice stopped him. "Mr. Carter?" Michael turned to see Lisa standing nearby. She looked different, lighter somehow, as if she had shed the weight of a burden she had carried for years. She wore a modest blazer, her red hair tied back in a loose bun. Her posture was no longer defensive, but open and humble. "Lisa," Michael said, his expression neutral, but not unkind. "I didn't expect to see you here." Lisa smiled faintly, clutching the program pamphlet in her hands. "I volunteer here now. Emily helped me get involved." Michael nodded, his respect for Emily growing even more. "How have you been?" "Learning," Lisa replied softly. "About myself. About others. I'm working to be better, one day at a time." She hesitated, then added, "Your words stayed with me. It's never too late to change. I think about that every day." Michael studied her for a moment, searching for any sign of pretense. There was none. Finally, he extended his hand, the same way he had on the plane. "Then keep going, Lisa. Change takes time, but you're on the right path." Lisa's eyes welled up as she shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. For everything." The ripple effect. As Michael left the summit, he paused outside the venue, looking up at the clear Chicago sky. The world felt different, not because of what had happened to him, but because of what had come from it. The incident on that plane had been ugly, but it had sparked a transformation in Lisa. It had reminded Michael of the importance of forgiveness, not for others' sake, but for his own. It had shown him that even the smallest actions, a word, a gesture, a conversation, could ripple out and change lives. Michael smiled as he thought about the Horizon Project and the people it would help. He imagined classrooms where children would learn empathy instead of prejudice, workplaces where diversity would be celebrated, and communities where people could finally see one another as equals. It was a long road ahead, but Michael had always believed in building bridges where others saw walls. A message for all. On the anniversary of the Horizon Project's launch, a viral video surfaced online. It was of Michael delivering a speech at a community center, his words resonating with people around the world. "Change doesn't happen because we wish for it," he said. "It happens because we choose it. Every day, we have the chance to be better, to listen, to understand, and to lift each other up. The question is, what will you choose?" The video ended with a quote that became a rallying cry. "It's never too late to change, but change starts with you."